Have you ever wondered about Seth? Why do so few people recognize his remarkable story? Millions are familiar with Cain and Abel, but the third son, born to Adam and Eve, stands as one of Scripture's most forgotten individuals. And yet, the family line descending from him would forever alter the trajectory of humanity. Seth was far more than just another name in the biblical record. He became the forefather of Noah, and because of that connection, he is an ancestor to every living person on earth today. The story surrounding him shows us how the divine plan for humanity's redemption started during the first family's bleakest hour, the moment when one brother took the life of another and all hope appeared to vanish. But before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, think about tapping that like button and subscribing. That really supports what we do here. And please share with us where in the world you're watching from and what the time is right now. We would absolutely love to connect with you. So, with that said, let's dive right in. The son who was appointed. The world now lies shattered. The gates of Eden have been sealed shut by flaming swords. Once, two brothers walked across these lands. One of them brought an offering of grain. The other one brought blood. Now Cain roams the earth, bearing a mark and living in exile. The voice of Abel continues, crying out from the soil. Eve mourns with arms that feel painfully empty. But now, life begins to stir once more. Within her womb, another opportunity takes shape, another thread of hope. When this child finally comes into the world, she gives him the name Seth. That word carries the meaning of appointed, chosen, deliberately placed. God has given me another offspring in place of Abel, she says quietly, because Cain killed him. The act of naming holds significance far beyond a grieving mother's sorrow. Seth arrives not simply as a replacement, but rather as the fulfillment of something greater. Where Abel's time on earth was violently shortened, the life of Seth will extend the holy lineage. Where Cain chose the path of violence, Seth will follow the way of righteousness. This appointment originates from the highest authority. Divine intention courses through the bloodline of this newborn child. Adam cradles his third son and perceives something distinctly different. This child carries no exile mark like the one Cain bears, no foreshadowing of premature death as Abel had. Instead, Seth embodies the very image of his father, bearing the same characteristics, carrying that same divine essence transmitted from the very first breath of creation. The Genesis narrative tells us that Adam had reached 130 years when he fathered a son bearing his own resemblance, formed in his own image, and he called this child Seth. The moment in time holds importance. 3 decades have elapsed since Abel's blood saturated the ground. 30 years spent in grief, in waiting, in questioning whether the promise made to humanity by the divine would manage to endure. The arrival of Seth shatters this prolonged silence. Hope makes its way back to a household that had experienced nothing but devastating loss. Still, Seth enters into a world that has been permanently transformed. The purity of Eden can never be reclaimed. The awareness of both good and evil now influences every single decision. Death has become part of the human experience. Even the earth itself pushes back against the labor of human hands. Thorns strangle the crops. Every harvest must be watered with human sweat. This becomes the legacy that Seth inherits. Yet, alongside hardship arrives a sense of purpose. Seth is destined to father an entirely new line of descendants. Through his lineage, humanity will rediscover how to call out to the name of the Lord. From those who come after him will emerge the righteous ones, the faithful ones, those who choose to walk alongside the divine despite living in a fractured world. This is the line that will safeguard divine memory as it passes from one generation to the next. Within the ancient writings, Seth represents something beyond mere survival. He personifies the concept of restoration. While the opening chapters of humanity's story speak of falling away, Seth initiates the extended narrative of rising up. Not a return to Eden, mind you. That pathway remains permanently closed, but rather a movement forward towards something entirely new, a different form of relationship with the divine, one constructed not on innocence but rather on deliberate choice, not on flawlessness but on steady faithfulness. The child develops and grows strong. His parents invest in him everything they can still remember about the garden. The particular way light appeared before shadows entered the picture. The distinctive sound of the divine voice speaking during the cool evening hours, the names assigned to every living creature, the intended purpose behind each and every star. This accumulated knowledge becomes what Seth inherits, more valuable than any precious metal, more essential than the very air he breathes. Seth discovers how to work the ground in spite of the curse placed upon it, how to draw life from soil that resists his efforts, how to recognize beauty in a world now marked by thorns and thistles. His hands develop calluses, just like those of his father. His back bends beneath the unforgiving rays of the sun. But through it all, his heart maintains its tenderness toward the divine. This quality becomes what defines him most. Physical capability matched equally by spiritual receptiveness. The genealogical records identify Seth as the father of humanity's line of righteousness. But before any of that, he is simply a son learning to navigate existence in a fallen creation. Each new day presents fresh obstacles, finding ways to endure the harsh bite of winter, discovering methods to heal sickness without access to Eden's tree that gave life, figuring out how to transmit truth when the technology of writing does not yet exist. These daily practical struggles mold Seth's character just as powerfully as any heavenly calling. Various accounts grow up around the childhood of Seth, how he gained the ability to tell poisonous plants apart from those that bring healing, how he uncovered the mysteries of fire, how he constructed the very first tools beyond what Adam had shown him. Each breakthrough helps his family continue surviving. Every discovery pushes back against the strength of the curse. Seth emerges as humanity's original innovator, the individual who discovers fresh paths forward when the familiar routes become blocked. As Seth reaches maturity, his function becomes clear. He is meant to be the connecting point between Eden's fading memory and humanity's unfolding future, the guardian of divine promise in a world that appears to have lost all recollection of its maker. Through his existence, the sacred lineage will persist. Through the children he fathers, worship will experience rebirth. Through the legacy he leaves, hope will manage to outlast despair. Two separate bloodlines, two distinct civilizations, two of Adam's sons make opposing choices about their paths. The children born to them follow these divergent paths into the future. The line of Cain constructs cities. The line of Seth pursues the divine. From this division emerges humanity's very first great separation. Two different ways of living as human beings. Two competing visions for what life ought to become. Those descended from Cain travel eastward. They establish themselves in the territory called Nod, wandering, always in motion. But their wandering is not without direction. They construct things, they innovate, they create. Cain himself establishes a city, naming it after his own son, Enoch. This marks human history's very first urban center. Walls rise up from the untamed wilderness. Streets take on organized patterns. Humans begin gathering together, forming communities designed for protection and advancement. These urban centers transform into hubs of human accomplishment. Jabal creates the practice of herding livestock. Jubal invents musical instruments. Tubal-Cain masters the art of forging with bronze and iron. Each successive generation contributes something fresh to the collective knowledge of humanity. Artistic expression flourishes right alongside technological progress. Songs ring out through the public squares of the city. Metal clangs against metal inside the workshops. The descendants of Cain continue expanding the limits of what humans can achieve. But something else begins growing within these cities as well. Acts of violence start multiplying. Lamech, who is Cain's great-great-great-grandson, makes boasts about the deadly violence he has committed. "I have killed a man because he wounded me, and a young man because he hurt me," he announces. If vengeance for Cain was sevenfold, Lamech insists his vengeance will be 77-fold. The culture of retaliation grows stronger. Bloodshed demands more bloodshed in return. The repeating pattern of violence that started with the death of Abel now spreads through human society like a contagion. Pride walks hand in hand with this violence. Those who build the cities come to believe their accomplishments elevate them to godlike status. They create their own systems of law. They develop their own religious practices. They worship images of their own making. The memory of Eden gradually fades from their historical records. They begin telling new narratives about where humans came from. Stories that position humans as the heroes. Stories that reduce the divine to little more than distant mythology. Meanwhile, those descended from Seth take an entirely different path. They maintain their connection to the land, staying close to the soil that was once watered by Abel's blood. They make it a priority to remember. They guard the ancient stories. They instruct their children about the garden, about the tree that gave life, about the promise that someday everything would be set right once more. The descendants of Seth don't completely abandon innovation. They become skilled in agriculture. They create simple tools. They uncover new techniques for working with wood and stone. But the progress they make serves entirely different ends. Not domination, but rather careful stewardship. Not bringing glory to themselves, but rather serving the divine. They understand themselves as caretakers of creation rather than those who conquer it. The differences between them deepen as time passes. The line of Cain multiplies at a rapid pace. Their cities expand across the ancient territories. Networks for trade connect settlements that are far apart. Specialized crafts begin to emerge. Wealth begins accumulating. Political structures start taking form. The very first kingdoms begin taking shape in those eastern territories where Cain's children raised their walls. The line of Seth expands at a slower pace. They place more value on depth than on breadth, on quality than on sheer quantity. Each child receives thorough training in the memory of divine things. Each generation transmits the sacred stories without alteration. They function as humanity's keepers of knowledge, the preservers of truth during an era marked by forgetting. Their settlements remain relatively small. Their way of life stays simple. But their connection to the divine remains powerful. Even their customs surrounding marriage reveal this division. The descendants of Cain intermarry without much restriction. Physical beauty and social benefit guide their selections. Attractiveness and material wealth hold more importance than character or faith. Their marriages produce children with cleverness, with talent, with excellence in the arts and crafts and the skills of warfare. But not necessarily children who still remember the divine. The line of Seth approaches marriage partners with greater care. They look for companions who hold the same values, who remember the same stories, who worship the same divine being. Their marriages may appear less dramatic, perhaps less passionate, but they bring forth children who continue carrying the sacred traditions forward, who preserve the connection to divine purpose. These two bloodlines create entirely different kinds of civilization. The descendants of Cain build for their own benefit, for their own glory. Their accomplishments tower upward toward the heavens as an act of defiance against divine authority. They desire to be remembered, to leave behind monuments that will survive beyond their brief existence. Their cities stand as proof of human capability set free from divine restriction. The descendants of Seth build for the benefit of others, for their children, for future generations they will never live to see. Their accomplishments point beyond their own achievements toward divine intentions. They desire to be faithful, to leave behind legacies that bring honor to their Creator rather than to themselves. Their quiet communities stand as proof of human potential when it aligns itself with divine will. Both bloodlines encounter the same obstacles: disease, natural catastrophes, scarcity of resources, the unavoidable reality of death. But their responses differ completely. The line of Cain confronts these obstacles through human cleverness alone. They create medicines, they construct defenses against flooding, they design systems for storing resources, they organize military forces, they attempt to solve every problem using only human effort and intelligence. The line of Seth combines human effort with reliance on the divine. They work with intensity, but they also pray with intensity. They plan with care, but they also trust with depth. They view obstacles as opportunities to demonstrate faith rather than merely as tests of human capability. Their solutions may appear simpler, but they frequently prove more sustainable as time goes on. This division creates friction between the bloodlines. Those descended from Cain view the line of Seth as backward thinking, primitive in their ways, bound by superstition. Why worship a deity you cannot see when human achievement delivers visible outcomes? Why depend on divine assistance when human ingenuity solves the problems? Why cling to ancient traditions when fresh ideas offer superior solutions? Those descended from Seth view the line of Cain as dangerous, as proud, as forgetful of where they truly came from. They observe the violence within the cities, the expanding arrogance, the abandonment of divine worship. They worry that humanity is selecting the wrong path, moving farther away from its purpose, forgetting its creator in the pursuit of created things. This friction will intensify across the passing generations. Two competing visions of human destiny, two different understandings of humanity's place within creation, two contrasting responses to the fundamental questions that every generation must grapple with. What does it actually mean to be human? What should humans strive to become? How should they relate to the divine? The answers that the line of Cain and the line of Seth each develop will shape everything that comes afterward. The world of the earliest people, the ancient territories stretch out far beyond what modern understanding can truly grasp. Rivers follow different courses here. Mountains rise to greater heights. Valleys run to deeper depths. This is Earth before the great deluge reshaped its surface, a world where the geography itself appears more alive, more deeply connected to the divine purposes that shaped it from the very beginning. The climate runs warmer than what will exist in later times. No ice blankets the northern territories. Dense vegetation spreads across enormous areas. The atmosphere holds greater moisture content, creating ideal conditions for growth across regions that will one day turn to desert. Rivers flow continuously year-round through valleys that in later ages will experience only seasonal streams. The entire planet pulses with abundance. Within this world, humans live in ways quite different from their distant descendants. Their bodies carry less accumulated damage from generations of genetic deterioration. They stand at greater heights, they live for longer spans, they heal more rapidly, disease affects them more mildly. The original blessing from creation still flows through their veins, though diminished from Eden's perfection. Death exists here, yes, but it comes slowly, very slowly indeed. Seth matures while hearing accounts of the paradise that was lost. His parents describe trees that produced fruit without any thorns, rivers that watered the earth without requiring rainfall, animals that lived in harmony without experiencing fear, light that filled the sky without needing sun or moon. These memories shape how Seth understands what the world should one day become again. But the world that Seth actually inhabits bears very little resemblance to the perfection of Eden. The ground fights back against human cultivation. Weeds compete aggressively with crops. Insects destroy what has been harvested. Wild animals turn dangerous and threatening. Weather patterns become impossible to predict. The curse touches every single aspect of daily existence. Yet when compared to the ages that will follow, this world still holds echoes of its original design. Forests blanket most of the land. Massive trees tower upward toward the sky. Their trunks grow so wide that entire families can find shelter inside the hollow spaces. Their branches spread so far that walking from one edge of a tree's shadow to the other edge requires half a day's journey. These giants provide everything humans require: food from the fruits they produce, medicine from their bark, shelter from their branches, tools from their wood. The animals display intelligence that is remarkable, more than modern species will possess. They respond when humans speak to them. They follow complex instructions. They work alongside humans in ways that will seem almost impossible to later generations. Horses run with greater speed, birds fly to greater heights, fish grow to larger sizes. Every species expresses its nature more completely in this world that exists closer to the dawn of creation. Seth learns to work alongside these creatures rather than dominating them. He speaks to the oxen as partners in the work of cultivation, calls to the birds as allies in locating water, asks permission from the trees before taking their fruit. This relationship between humans and the natural world reflects something of Eden's original harmony. Not perfect cooperation, perhaps, but respectful partnership between the various forms of life. Water flows with greater abundance than in the ages to come. Springs emerge from rocky ground where none will exist after the great flood. Rivers run broader and cleaner. Lakes stretch out to horizons in the distance. The water itself seems more vital, more alive, with properties that strengthen human health. Drinking from these sources provides nourishment beyond simple hydration, healing beyond merely quenching thirst. The soil brings forth crops with extraordinary nutritional density, grains that grow taller than the humans themselves, fruits that can feed families for days at a time, vegetables that provide complete nourishment from small portions. The earth responds to human cultivation with generous abundance. Though work remains necessary, the results far surpass the effort invested. A single harvest can sustain an entire community through extended seasons. When night arrives, the stars shine with greater brightness than later generations will ever witness. The atmosphere holds less pollution, less dust. The light reaches Earth with crystal clarity. Constellations tell stories that connect directly to human experience. The movements of celestial bodies mark the seasons and guide navigation with perfect accuracy. The sky functions as both calendar and compass for those who learn to read the messages it contains. Seth grows up beneath these brilliant stars. He learns their patterns from his father, Adam. Each constellation carries significance, stories of divine purpose written across the heavens. The same divine being who walked in Eden's garden set these lights in their places. They remind humanity that divine presence still watches over the world despite the separation that sin has caused. Sound travels differently in this world. Human voices carry across greater distances. Animals communicate across wider expanses. The earth itself seems more resonant. Music holds power that later generations can scarcely imagine. Songs literally bring healing to sickness, harmonies calm wild beasts. Rhythms coordinate group labor with supernatural efficiency. The connection between sound and spirit remains strong. Minerals exist in pure forms. Metals emerge from the ground requiring less refinement. Precious stones display colors and clarity unmatched by later discoveries. These materials serve practical purposes as well as decorative ones. Certain metals hold healing properties. Specific stones enhance human abilities. The earth provides exactly what humans need for their physical and spiritual development. The weather follows more predictable patterns. Rain arrives when needed for the crops. Sunshine appears when required for the harvest. Storms bring necessary change without devastating destruction. The seasons flow smoothly from one into another. Humans can plan their activities with confidence that natural conditions will cooperate. The relationship between heaven and earth maintains divine order. In this abundant world, Seth learns the art of memory. Without the technology of written language, everything important must be preserved within human minds. Stories, songs, genealogies, technical knowledge, spiritual truths. Each generation becomes a living library for the one that follows. Seth masters techniques for organizing vast amounts of information in patterns that can be easily recalled. The landscape itself functions as a teaching tool. Certain mountains hold significance for divine encounters. Specific valleys mark important events. Particular rivers define boundaries between tribes. The earth becomes humanity's very first book. Its features tell stories that must be remembered. Its beauty reflects truths about the divine character that shaped it. Yet shadows begin growing across this abundant world. Violence spreads through the cities of Cain. Pride corrupts human hearts. Memory of Eden fades among those who choose to forget. The very abundance that should inspire gratitude instead feeds human arrogance. Some begin to believe their prosperity comes from their own wisdom rather than from divine blessing. Seth watches these changes with increasing concern. He observes how quickly humans can turn from worship to self-worship, from gratitude to entitlement, from cooperation to competition. The world provides everything needed for human flourishing, but humans must choose whether to use these gifts wisely or waste them on selfish pursuits. This choice will define everything that follows. The abundant world of the earliest people offers unlimited potential for either good or evil. The same resources that could build paradise on earth can also create hell on earth. Everything depends on whether humans remember their Creator or forget Him in their fascination with His creation. The rise of worship. Something shifts when Enosh is born to Seth. The child arrives as hope takes new form in the world. Seth holds his son and speaks a name that means mortal, frail. The word carries weight beyond its simple meaning. It acknowledges human limitation while embracing human potential. Enosh will be mortal, yes, but his mortality will serve divine purposes. The birth marks a turning point in human history. According to the ancient records, during the lifetime of Enosh, humans begin to call upon the name of the Lord. This simple phrase describes a revolution in human consciousness. For the first time since Eden's closure, humans actively seek divine connection. They moved beyond mere memory of the divine toward actual relationship with the divine. Before Enosh, worship existed but remained private. Adam and Eve remembered their walks with the divine in Eden's garden. They taught their children about divine character and purpose. They offered sacrifices as Abel had done. But these acts of worship stayed within family circles, personal expressions of faith rather than communal celebrations. The generation of Enosh changes this pattern. They gather together to call upon the divine name. They create the first intentional communities focused on worship. These assemblies might seem simple by later standards. Groups of families meeting under the starlight, voices joined together in songs their grandparents taught them. Hands raised toward heaven in gestures of surrender and plea. But simplicity does not mean insignificance. These early worship gatherings establish patterns that will echo through all subsequent human history. The recognition that humans need divine help, the understanding that the divine responds to sincere seeking, the power of corporate prayer and praise, the importance of teaching children to participate in sacred community. The Hebrew phrase translated as "call upon the name of the Lord" carries deeper meaning than casual English suggests. To call upon the name means to invoke the character and authority of the one named. When the generation of Enosh begins this practice, they acknowledge divine sovereignty over their lives. They submit to divine authority. They request divine intervention in their circumstances. This calling requires knowledge of the divine name itself. Adam has preserved this sacred information through the generations since Eden, the name that the divine revealed to him in the garden, the name that carries power to heal and help and transform. The generation of Enosh receives this name as precious inheritance. They use it with reverence and hope. The gatherings probably begin small. Seth teaching his son Enosh the sacred traditions. Enosh sharing these truths with his own children. Extended families meeting to remember divine goodness together. But the practice spreads as its benefits become apparent. Communities that call upon the Lord experience divine blessing, protection from disasters, guidance in difficult decisions, healing for the sick, peace in conflicts. Word travels through the ancient lands. Other families hear about these gatherings. They come seeking to learn the divine name for themselves, to experience the peace and power that accompanies true worship. The assemblies grow from family meetings to tribal celebrations, from occasional gatherings to regular festivals, from private devotion to public proclamation. Music develops as central to these worship experiences. The descendants of Seth learn to create instruments from natural materials, flutes from hollow reeds, drums from stretched animal skins, string instruments from dried gourds and sinew. These tools help human voices carry divine praise across valleys and hills. They create an atmosphere that invites divine presence into human gatherings. The songs themselves preserve crucial information, genealogies set to memorable melodies, stories of divine faithfulness arranged in poetic verses, promises about future hope woven into choruses that children can easily learn. Music becomes the technology that preserves truth across generations in a world without written language. Dance accompanies the music, not entertainment, but expression of divine joy. Bodies moving in patterns that mirror the harmony of creation itself. Movements that tell stories about divine character and human purpose. Physical expression of spiritual truths that words alone cannot contain. The whole person engaged in worship of the whole divine being. Sacred spaces begin to emerge. Not buildings, but locations where divine encounters occur more frequently. Hilltops where the stars seem closer, valleys where voices carry farther, groves where ancient trees provide natural cathedrals. These places become pilgrimage destinations, sites where different families and tribes gather for major celebrations. Certain individuals emerge as leaders in these worship communities, people who demonstrate special gifting for leading songs, for organizing gatherings, for teaching children, for offering prayers that seem particularly effective. These leaders do not claim divine authority for themselves. They simply serve the community's need for coordination and guidance in worship practices. The timing of worship gatherings follows natural rhythms. New moon celebrations, seasonal festivals aligned with planting and harvest, Sabbath observances that provide rest from labor. These regular patterns create stability in community life. They ensure that divine relationship receives priority alongside daily survival needs. Sacrificial offerings accompany the vocal worship, animals given in gratitude for divine provision. Grains offered as symbols of human dependence on divine blessing. Precious items surrendered to demonstrate that the divine deserves the best of human possessions. These sacrifices teach important lessons about divine worthiness and human stewardship. The children receive special attention in these worship gatherings. They learn the sacred songs. They participate in simple rituals. They hear the old stories told in ways that capture their imagination. The community understands that worship practices must transfer successfully to the next generation, or they will disappear entirely. Every gathering includes elements designed specifically for young participants. As the practice spreads, it creates a distinction between communities that call upon the Lord and those that do not. The descendants of Seth become known as the worshipping people. Their settlements can be identified by the sounds of praise that carry across the landscape. Their daily rhythms include regular pauses for prayer and gratitude. This distinction will grow more pronounced as time passes. The worship of the true divine being will become the defining characteristic of the righteous line. the practice that separates them from surrounding cultures that turn toward false gods and human pride. What begins in the lifetime of Enosh as simple calling upon the divine name will develop into rich traditions of faith that sustain humanity through its darkest seasons ahead. The silent generations. The genealogies record their names but tell few stories. Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared. These descendants of Seth live long lives and leave minimal written history, yet their names themselves carry meaning, hidden clues about their character and purpose. Windows into the ancient world's understanding of human destiny. Kenan receives his name from his father Enosh. The word means possession or acquired, not in the sense of owning objects, but in the deeper sense of being established. Kenan represents the generation that consolidates the worship practices begun in his father's time. He takes the spontaneous spiritual movements of the era of Enosh and creates sustainable traditions from them. Under the leadership of Kenan, the calling upon the Lord's name becomes systematic. Regular gatherings replace sporadic meetings. Established songs replace improvised praise. Trained leaders replace spontaneous speakers. This systematization might seem to reduce spiritual vitality, but actually, it ensures spiritual survival. The practices become strong enough to weather difficult seasons ahead. Kenan lives 910 years according to the ancient records, nearly a full millennium of faithful service. During this immense lifespan, he witnesses the rise and fall of entire civilizations among the descendants of Cain. Cities built and destroyed, technologies developed and abandoned, political systems created and dissolved. Yet through all these changes, Kenan maintains steady devotion to divine worship. His son Mahalalel carries a name meaning praise of the divine or glory of the divine. This name suggests that worship practices continue to develop during his lifetime. The simple calling upon the divine name evolves into more elaborate expressions of praise. Songs become more sophisticated, instruments multiply in variety, sacred dances grow more complex. The community learns to offer worship worthy of the divine glory it celebrates. Mahalalel lives 895 years. His long lifespan spans the development of advanced technologies among the descendants of Cain. He watches the invention of bronze working, sees the rise of urban architecture, observes the creation of complex irrigation systems. Yet he chooses to maintain the simpler lifestyle of his ancestors. Technology serves human needs, yes, but does not replace divine dependence. During the lifetime of Mahalalel, the contrast between the two bloodlines becomes more pronounced. The descendants of Cain achieve remarkable innovations in metallurgy, agriculture, and construction. Their cities grow into regional powers. Their armies develop sophisticated weapons. Their artists create works of stunning beauty. Their accomplishments seem to demonstrate human potential unleashed from divine limitations. Meanwhile, the line of Seth appears to stagnate in comparison. They maintain traditional agricultural practices. They build simple structures. They create functional rather than decorative objects. They preserve old songs rather than compose new ones. To outside observers, they seem backward, resistant to progress, trapped in outdated ways of thinking. But this apparent stagnation serves important purposes. While the descendants of Cain chase innovation for its own sake, the line of Seth focuses on preservation of essential truths. They become humanity's memory keepers, the guardians of divine revelation passed down from Eden itself. Their resistance to change protects them from the spiritual corruption that accompanies rapid cultural transformation. Jared continues this pattern when he assumes leadership of the righteous line. His name means descent or to come down. This might refer to physical descent from Adam through the generations, but it also suggests spiritual descent, the continuing flow of divine blessing from generation to generation, the preservation of sacred traditions despite external pressures to abandon them. Jared lives 962 years, the longest recorded lifespan except for Methuselah, who comes later. This extraordinary longevity allows him to provide stability across nearly 10 centuries of human development. He serves as a living link between the earliest post-Eden generations and the pre-flood world's final chapters. His memory spans the entire history of antediluvian civilization. Under the guidance of Jared, the descendants of Seth face increasing pressure to conform to surrounding cultures. Intermarriage with the line of Cain becomes more common. Young people question the value of maintaining old traditions. The appeal of city life and technological advancement creates tension within traditionally faithful families. Some abandon their heritage entirely. Yet Jared holds the community together through personal example and patient teaching. He demonstrates that faithfulness to divine calling brings deeper satisfaction than material prosperity. That relationship with the divine provides more security than human achievement. That the old ways preserve wisdom that innovation cannot replace. These silent generations serve crucial functions in divine history. They provide continuity between the dramatic spiritual breakthrough of the lifetime of Enosh and the extraordinary spirituality of Enoch, who comes later. They maintain the sacred traditions during the long centuries when nothing spectacular happens. They prove that faithfulness does not require constant miraculous intervention. Their lives teach important lessons about spiritual maturity. Young faith often needs dramatic experiences to sustain enthusiasm. Mature faith finds the divine in ordinary daily experience. These patriarchs worship consistently, whether or not they receive special revelations. They pray regularly, whether or not they witness miraculous answers. They remain faithful, whether or not their circumstances seem to reward their devotion. The length of their lives provides opportunity for deep spiritual development. Modern humans might accomplish much in 70 years, but these ancient humans had centuries to grow in wisdom and understanding, to observe patterns across multiple generations, to develop spiritual practices refined by hundreds of years of experience. Their longevity becomes a divine gift that enables spiritual achievements impossible in shorter lifespans. Their names preserved in the sacred genealogies ensure their contribution to divine history receives recognition. Though few stories survive about their specific actions, their names testify to their character and purpose. Future generations can see the unbroken chain of faithfulness that connects Seth to Noah. The steady transmission of divine memory across the centuries that separate Eden from the flood. Modern readers might find these silent generations boring compared to more dramatic biblical figures, but their quiet faithfulness makes possible everything that follows. Without their preservation of sacred traditions, Enoch would have no foundation for his prophetic ministry. Without their maintenance of divine memory, Noah would not recognize the divine voice when judgment finally comes. They represent the majority of faithful believers throughout history. Most who serve the divine never perform miracles or receive special revelations. Most live ordinary lives marked by steady obedience rather than spectacular achievement. Most contribute to divine purposes through faithful daily choices rather than dramatic public ministry. The silent generations honor these ordinary heroes of faith. Enoch walks with the divine. Among the descendants of Seth, one stands apart. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, lives differently than those around him. The ancient record states simply that he walked with the divine. These 4 words describe a life that breaks every conventional pattern, an existence that touches eternity while remaining fully human. Enoch begins life like any other child of Seth's line, born into the tradition of calling upon the Lord's name, raised on stories of Eden and promises of divine faithfulness, taught the genealogies that connect his family to Adam himself. Nothing in his early years suggests the extraordinary destiny that awaits him, but something changes when Enoch reaches adulthood. The birth of his son Methuselah marks a turning point in his spiritual development. The name Methuselah means when he dies, it shall come. This prophetic name suggests Enoch receives divine revelation about coming judgment. The birth of his son awakens prophetic insight that will define the rest of his life. From this moment forward, Enoch begins walking with the divine in ways unprecedented since Adam's expulsion from Eden. This walking involves more than occasional prayer or worship. It describes continuous divine communion, constant spiritual awareness, life lived in perfect harmony with divine will and purpose. The phrase "walked with the divine" appears rarely in ancient literature. Only two men received this description before the flood: Enoch and Noah. The Hebrew word for walking suggests movement toward a destination, progress along a predetermined path. Enoch's life becomes a journey deeper into divine relationship with each passing year. This walk requires extraordinary spiritual discipline. Enoch must align his thoughts with divine thoughts, his desires with divine desires, his actions with divine purposes. Every choice becomes an opportunity for greater harmony or greater discord with the divine will. Every moment offers potential for deeper communion or spiritual retreat. The walking also demands increasing separation from worldly concerns. While others focus on accumulating wealth or building cities or developing technologies, Enoch invests his energy in spiritual pursuits. He studies divine character, contemplates divine purposes, seeks deeper understanding of divine truth. His priorities diverge radically from those of his contemporaries. Enoch develops prophetic abilities during his walk with the divine. He receives visions of future events, understanding of divine plans, revelation about spiritual realities hidden from ordinary human perception. These insights make him a valuable counselor to those seeking divine guidance, but they also create distance between him and those who prefer comfortable ignorance. The ancient Book of Enoch, though not included in the biblical canon, preserves traditions about his prophetic ministry. According to these sources, Enoch receives detailed revelations about angels and heavenly realms, about the corruption spreading through human society, about divine judgment planned for the wicked, about hope reserved for the righteous. These revelations show Enoch the cosmic scope of divine purposes. He sees beyond the immediate concerns of daily survival to eternal consequences of human choices. He understands how individual decisions affect spiritual realities in heavenly places. He recognizes the spiritual warfare underlying visible human conflicts. Enoch's walk with the divine also produces practical wisdom for earthly life. He learns divine principles for agriculture and animal husbandry, receives insight into natural phenomena that helps his community survive disasters, develops understanding of human nature that makes him an effective counselor and judge. His spirituality enhances, rather than diminishes, his practical abilities. The relationship transforms Enoch's physical being as well as his spiritual nature. Extended communion with the divine affects his body in ways that prefigure resurrection reality. He begins to transcend normal human limitations. His aging process slows, his health improves, his strength increases rather than decreases with advancing years. Other members of Seth's line notice these changes in Enoch. They seek his counsel on spiritual matters, ask him to interpret dreams and visions, request his prayers for healing and guidance. Enoch becomes the spiritual leader for the righteous community. His authority comes not from position or inheritance, but from obvious divine relationship. But Enoch's spiritual development creates tension with surrounding cultures. His prophetic messages challenge the growing wickedness in the cities of Cain. His lifestyle contradicts the materialistic values, becoming dominant among humans. His warnings about divine judgment seem fanatical to those who believe human progress makes divine intervention unnecessary. The opposition intensifies as Enoch's prophetic ministry grows bolder. According to ancient traditions, he preaches fearlessly about coming judgment. He calls on humans to repent from wickedness and return to divine worship. He warns that divine patience has limits and that consequences for sin will eventually arrive. These messages make him enemies among the powerful and influential. Yet Enoch continues his walk with the divine despite external opposition. His relationship with the divine becomes more precious than human approval. His confidence in divine truth grows stronger than his concern for personal safety. His commitment to prophetic ministry outweighs his desire for a comfortable life. The walk culminates in an unprecedented experience. After 365 years of increasing divine communion, Enoch's earthly existence ends in a unique fashion. The ancient record states that the divine took him. He does not experience death like other humans. Instead, he receives translation directly from earthly life to heavenly existence. This translation serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates divine power over death itself. It provides hope for others that death need not be the final human destination. It preserves Enoch from the violent persecution that his prophetic ministry would eventually attract. It establishes him as a heavenly witness to human events on earth. Enoch's disappearance creates a profound impact on those who remain. His translation proves that his prophetic messages came from a divine source. His extraordinary exit validates his claims about spiritual realities beyond physical perception. His absence leaves a void that reminds the community of the divine relationship they too could pursue. The memory of Enoch's walk with the divine becomes inspiration for future generations. His example shows that intimate divine relationship remains possible even in a fallen world. His life demonstrates that humans need not accept spiritual mediocrity as their permanent condition. His translation promises that divine purposes extend beyond earthly existence into eternal realities. The Gnostic Seth, secret Messiah. Centuries after the biblical accounts were recorded, Seth emerges in new literature with a radically different character. Gnostic writers of the early Christian era transform him from a quiet patriarch into a cosmic redeemer. They create elaborate mythologies that make Seth a central figure in spiritual salvation. These texts reveal more about Gnostic theology than the historical Seth, but they demonstrate his enduring symbolic power. The Apocryphon of John presents Seth as a divine emissary sent to counteract the work of false gods. In this Gnostic cosmology, the material world results from the mistakes of ignorant divine beings called archons. Humanity becomes trapped in physical bodies that obscure their true spiritual nature. Seth arrives to awaken chosen souls to their divine origins and guide them back to the spiritual realm. This Gnostic Seth bears little resemblance to the biblical patriarch. Instead of being Adam's third son, he becomes a spiritual principle that existed before material creation. His mission involves revealing secret knowledge rather than preserving sacred traditions. His followers seek escape from the physical world rather than faithful living within it. The name Seth becomes a symbol for spiritual awakening rather than historical genealogy. The Gospel of the Egyptians develops these themes further. It describes Seth as the great invisible spirit who generates divine light in opposition to material darkness. This text presents three appearances of Seth throughout history. First, as the original divine light. Second, as the revealer of hidden knowledge. Third, as the final redeemer who will complete the salvation process for spiritual seekers. According to this Gnostic mythology, Seth's true followers are scattered throughout history, but remain connected through their possession of special knowledge. They recognize their divine origins despite being trapped in material bodies. They seek liberation through understanding rather than faith. They consider themselves spiritually superior to ordinary humans who remain ignorant of their true nature. The Sethian Gnostics create elaborate ritual systems around Seth's supposed teachings. They develop baptismal ceremonies that claim to reproduce Seth's divine nature in human participants. They practice sacred meals that supposedly provide spiritual nourishment unavailable through ordinary food. They engage in meditation techniques designed to separate the soul from bodily concerns and reconnect it with divine light. These rituals reflect fundamental Gnostic beliefs about the nature of salvation. Physical actions cannot provide spiritual liberation in their view. Only secret knowledge can free the soul from material imprisonment. Seth becomes the great teacher who first revealed this knowledge and continues to transmit it to worthy recipients across the generations. The Gnostic texts also describe Seth's cosmic battle against the forces of ignorance and material bondage. He leads armies of light beings against the archons who created the physical world. This warfare takes place in spiritual dimensions invisible to ordinary human perception. Victory will come when enough souls awaken to their divine nature and escape material existence entirely. Sethian communities develop around these teachings throughout the Mediterranean world during the early centuries of the Christian era. They attract followers who feel alienated from mainstream religious traditions, who seek more esoteric spiritual experiences, who believe that salvation requires special knowledge unavailable to the masses. Seth's name provides ancient authority for their innovative theological ideas. These groups often blend Seth's mythology with other religious traditions. They incorporate elements from Greek philosophy, Egyptian mystery religions, Jewish mysticism, and Christian theology. Seth becomes part of syncretic systems that attempt to unite all spiritual wisdom into comprehensive worldviews. His biblical origins provide Jewish and Christian credibility, while his Gnostic development allows unlimited theological creativity. The link between biblical Seth and the Gnostic version of Seth stays weak, uncertain at its core. Writers from Gnostic traditions borrow the name and the basic family tree details from Genesis, but they build a completely different character and mythology using these borrowed pieces. Their version of Seth fulfills Gnostic theological goals instead of keeping alive ancient historical memories. Still, the way Gnostics appropriated Seth shows us something meaningful about his lasting spiritual significance. Even religious movements considered heretical see the symbolic strength in Seth as the one chosen to replace Abel, as the one who started the righteous family line, as the forefather of those who invoke the divine name. They reshape these characteristics for their own ends, but they can't dismiss Seth's fundamental role in spiritual history. The Gnostic Seth also shows us how religious traditions change through reinterpretation over the centuries and across different cultures. The straightforward biblical story of Seth's birth and family line turns into the groundwork for intricate theological systems that would shock the original writers. Religious symbols turn out to be remarkably flexible, adapting to fresh contexts and requirements. Today's scholars examine Gnostic Seth mainly for what these writings tell us about early Christian variety and the growth of alternative religious movements. The detailed mythologies offer windows into Gnostic theology and practice. The ritual descriptions shed light on religious life in communities that existed right alongside mainstream Christianity. The philosophical concepts show how ancient religious thinkers tried solving basic questions about human existence and divine reality. But for anyone interested in the actual historical figure of Seth, Gnostic literature creates more questions than answers. These writings mirror 2nd and 3rd century theological theorizing instead of 1st millennium historical memory. They take Seth's name and basic life details as launching points for imaginative religious creativity, rather than efforts to maintain authentic ancient traditions. The difference between biblical Seth and Gnostic Seth shows the gap between historical narrative and theological symbolism. Biblical writers present Seth as an actual person who existed in a particular historical setting and carried out specific historical roles. Gnostic writers treat Seth as a theological symbol, representing abstract spiritual concepts and cosmic truths. Both methods serve valid purposes inside their own religious communities. Biblical Seth gives the genealogical base for the righteous family line that leads to Noah and ultimately to Christ. Gnostic Seth offers a theological structure for grasping spiritual awakening and salvation through knowledge. Neither tradition deserves to be measured completely by the other's criteria. The way Seth's name endures across these various religious traditions points to his core importance in human spiritual thinking. Whether seen as a historical patriarch or a cosmic principle, Seth stands for hope of spiritual renewal in a broken world. He represents the idea that divine plans can outlast human failure and keep moving toward final restoration. Seth in Jewish mysticism. Jewish tradition reaches far past biblical narrative in how it handles Seth. Rabbinic literature changes him from a simple patriarch into a cosmic figure whose impact molds all history that follows. Mystical writings portray him as priest, scribe, and proto-messianic savior. These developments reveal how post-biblical Judaism grasped Seth's importance for divine intentions. The Book of Jubilees lays early groundwork for Seth's expanded position. This ancient writing describes Seth as the first human to study writing from angels. According to Jubilees, divine messengers instruct Seth to document genealogies, maintain sacred traditions, and keep astronomical knowledge. His writing becomes humanity's initial effort to preserve divine revelation in lasting form. This tradition positions Seth as the creator of human literacy. Before him, knowledge moved through spoken transmission only. Memory functioned as humanity's sole library. But Seth gains divine inspiration to develop written symbols, capable of preserving information through the generations. His creation guarantees that sacred truths endure even when human memory weakens. Rabbinic sources portray Seth as the first priest in human history. They maintain that his sacrifice to God set the patterns that later priests would mirror. His offering methods become templates for correct worship. His grasp of divine requirements builds the foundation for ritual systems that unfold throughout Jewish history. Some traditions give Seth credit for constructing the first altar for sacrifice. Others paint him as the first human to pray at set times instead of only during emergencies. Still others present him as the first to give children formal religious teaching. These different traditions agree that Seth started systematic religious practices that separate worship from simple superstition. Kabbalistic literature pushes these themes much farther. Mystical writings describe Seth as a divine soul, taking human form to rescue humanity from spiritual decay. His birth means intervention by higher spiritual powers to stop human history from collapsing into total failure. His life creates a connection between divine and human worlds. According to these mystical traditions, Seth holds knowledge of divine names that grant him power to work miracles. He grasps the hidden meanings of Hebrew letters. He can control spiritual energies to cure disease and overcome demons. His wisdom covers both practical knowledge for earthly living and secret understanding of heavenly mysteries. The Zohar and similar Kabbalistic writings describe Seth as the spiritual forefather of all righteous souls across history. They teach that certain elevated souls are actually reincarnations of Seth's divine essence. These special souls continue his mission of maintaining divine truth and fighting spiritual darkness in every generation. This mystical family line makes Seth the spiritual father of prophets, sages, and righteous leaders throughout Jewish history. Moses gains some of Seth's divine essence. David brings forward Seth's royal power. The Messiah will finish the mission that Seth started in the earliest generations of human life. Some Kabbalistic traditions describe Seth as still living in concealed form somewhere on earth. Like Enoch and Elijah, he never actually died, but keeps influencing human matters from hiding. Advanced spiritual seekers might meet him in visions or dreams. His presence offers ongoing direction for those pursuing divine wisdom. Other mystical sources place Seth in the heavenly court, where he acts as defender for humanity before the divine throne. His direct experience of human struggle makes him an effective advocate for those facing spiritual challenges. His righteousness supplies merit that can shield less righteous humans from divine judgment. Medieval Jewish writings often describe Seth as the writer of various ancient books of wisdom. They credit him with works on astronomy, medicine, agriculture, and spiritual growth. These books supposedly hold divine revelation that Seth gained straight from angels or through prophetic visions. Though the actual texts have disappeared, their wisdom keeps shaping human development. The tradition of Seth as cosmic recorder goes beyond simple writing to include safeguarding all crucial knowledge. He becomes humanity's first librarian, the keeper of information vital for human survival and spiritual growth. Without his work, later generations would have completely lost connection to their divine origins. Some rabbinic sources describe Seth as the genuine heir of Adam's spiritual power. While Cain got the curse and Abel died young, Seth inherited the divine blessing first given to humanity in Eden. This blessing covers dominion over creation, understanding of divine intentions, and duty for human spiritual guidance. This inherited power makes Seth the first king in a spiritual sense, though not in political terms. His kingdom includes those who pick righteousness over wickedness. His subjects are willing followers instead of conquered people. His rule works through moral influence instead of physical strength. Jewish mystical traditions also describe Seth's part in future messianic happenings. They teach that the Messiah will hold Seth's divine essence in its fullness. The Messianic age will bring back the conditions that existed during Seth's lifetime, when humans could speak directly with divine messengers, and exist in harmony with creation. Some traditions describe particular signs that will signal the Messiah's coming, including the finding of Seth's lost books of wisdom. Others forecast that Seth himself will come back in physical form to prepare the path for messianic redemption. These prophecies mirror the continuing Jewish conviction that Seth's mission stays unfinished until all creation undergoes complete restoration. The endurance of these mystical traditions about Seth through centuries of Jewish development proves his central place in Jewish spiritual thinking. Even when historical facts stay unclear, his symbolic meaning keeps inspiring theological thinking and spiritual longing. Modern Jewish scholars examine these mystical traditions mainly for their perspective on post-biblical Jewish theology instead of for historical facts about the ancient Seth. The complex developments show how Jewish thinkers used biblical figures as structures for investigating fundamental questions about divine purpose, human nature, and cosmic fate. Still, even as theological symbols, these traditions maintain important truths about Seth's significance. They acknowledge his role as starter of the righteous lineage. They recognize his importance in maintaining divine revelation. They respect his contribution to humanity's spiritual advancement. Whether understood in literal or symbolic terms, Seth stays central to Jewish understanding of divine purposes in human history. The Book of Adam and Eve. Ancient storytellers took the short biblical accounts of humanity's first family and expanded them into detailed narratives full of emotion and specifics. The life of Adam and Eve, also called the Apocalypse of Moses, puts Seth at the heart of humanity's deepest experiences with death, hope, and divine mercy. These stories show how later generations understood Seth's part in the cosmic story of fall and redemption. The story opens as Adam confronts his last illness. For 9 centuries, he has borne the burden of bringing sin and death into human experience. Now mortality takes him, as it took his son Abel earlier. But Adam doesn't face death by himself. Seth stands next to his father's bed, prepared to help in ways that will shape his character forever. Eve sees that Adam's end draws near and looks for some way to reduce his suffering. She recalls the tree of life from Eden's garden. If she could get oil from that sacred tree, maybe it could cure Adam's sickness, or at least ease his pain. This oil means more than medicine. It represents hope that divine mercy could still undo the curse of death. Seth offers himself for this impossible task. He will travel to Eden's gates and ask the angelic guards for the oil of mercy. The mission appears hopeless from a human viewpoint. Eden has stayed sealed since his parents' removal. Cherubim with flaming swords protect every way in. No human has come near those gates since the day of banishment. But Seth's readiness to try the journey shows his nature. He doesn't figure out chances of success. He doesn't argue about the theology of divine mercy. He just answers his father's need with whatever action stays possible. This willingness to serve, no matter how futile it seems, becomes a defining feature of Seth's way of life. The trip to Eden takes Seth through landscapes that still carry hints of paradise lost. Rivers that once fed the garden now run past their old borders. Trees that once grew perfect fruit now battle thorns and sickness. Animals that once existed in peace now run from human presence. Every mile reminds Seth of what humanity gave up through disobedience. When Seth reaches Eden's edge, he meets the cherubim standing watch with their flaming swords. These angelic beings know him right away. They know his family history. They understand his purpose. But they also stand for divine justice that can't be bent by human need or longing. The cherubim give God's message to Seth with a blend of judgment and hope. The oil of life can't be given now. Adam has to face death as the result of his decisions. But this death isn't total defeat. Someday, when the time is right, divine mercy will win over divine justice. The tree of life will once more offer healing for humanity. The angels tell Seth about future happenings that will change human destiny. They speak of one who will come to crush the serpent's head, of a rising from death that will defeat death itself, of new creation that will go beyond even Eden's first glory. Seth takes these prophecies as valuable treasure to bring back to his dying father. The message gives exact timing for these future hopes. After 5,500 years pass, the promised rescuer will come. He will do what the oil of life could have done for a short time. He will give eternal healing for all who trust in divine mercy. Death will lose its power, and the grave will lose its hold. Seth comes back from Eden with nothing in his hands, but everything in his heart. He can't bring the oil his father requires, and yet he brings promises that go beyond any temporary healing. The news of future redemption gives comfort that simple medicine could never provide. Hope turns out stronger than healing when eternal perspective takes the place of temporary concern. Adam accepts Seth's news with calm surrender. The divine message confirms what he has suspected for a long time. Death has to be accepted as a fair result of sin. But death doesn't need to be feared as a final conclusion. Divine purposes reach beyond current situations into future realities that will prove divine goodness and accomplish divine promises. The dying Adam uses his leftover strength to instruct Seth and his other children about their duties as carriers of divine hope. They have to preserve the promises Seth heard at Eden's gates. They have to keep faith in divine mercy despite current sufferings. They have to ready future generations for the redemption that will finally arrive. When Adam passes away at last, Seth handles burial arrangements. He readies his father's body with respectful care. He picks a fitting burial location. He makes sure that proper respect is shown to the man who first bore divine image and will someday be brought back to divine glory. The funeral becomes a witness to hope instead of surrender to despair. According to the ancient story, divine messengers show up at Adam's burial to display proper ways for honoring the dead. They teach Seth how to ready bodies for burial in ways that recognize both human mortality and hope for resurrection. These methods become standard practices for all later generations. Seth also gets directions about keeping Adam's body safe for future resurrection. Certain spices have to be applied. Specific burial positions have to be kept. The grave location has to be marked and guarded. These requirements reflect belief that physical resurrection will need physical remains. Death breaks human existence, but doesn't erase human identity. The story ends with Seth taking leadership of the human family. He becomes keeper of divine promises heard at Eden's gates, guardian of hope for future redemption, teacher of faith that rises above present situations. His character, shaped by his journey to Eden, allows him to lead humanity through the long centuries of waiting for promised rescue. This ancient story changes Seth from a simple biblical figure into a complex character, dealing with ultimate questions about life, death, and divine purpose. His readiness to try impossible missions, his acceptance of discouraging answers, his dedication to keeping hope alive despite present suffering. These traits make him a fitting ancestor for all who must live by faith instead of sight. The oil of mercy that Seth couldn't get becomes a symbol for the divine grace that will finally be given through different means. His failed journey to Eden points ahead to the successful journey that the promised rescuer will one day complete. His empty hands point forward to hands that will be filled with power to heal and save and restore. The Cave of Treasures. High in the ancient mountains, past the reach of Cain's violent descendants, Seth finds a sacred cavern that will shape human destiny for generations. The Cave of Treasures turns into more than shelter from storms or storage for precious items. It becomes a sanctuary where divine purposes are kept safe through humanity's darkest centuries. According to Eastern Christian traditions, this cave starts with Adam himself. Before his death, the first man gets divine revelation about treasures that have to be kept for future generations. Not gold or silver, though these matter in their way, but treasures of much greater worth. Sacred relics that tie humanity to its divine origins and point toward its final destiny. Adam gives these treasures to Seth because of his tested faithfulness. The trip to Eden's gates showed Seth's dependability under strain. His acceptance of divine will, even with personal disappointment, proved his spiritual maturity. His commitment to keeping hope alive despite present suffering marked him as the right guardian for humanity's most precious belongings. The treasures themselves hold deep, symbolic meaning. Gold stands for divine glory that once filled Eden and will one day fill the earth again. Frankincense symbolizes prayers of the righteous, rising like incense before the divine throne. Myrrh hints ahead to the suffering through which redemption will finally come. Together, these three substances tell the whole story of divine purpose in human history. But the cave contains more than symbolic metals and spices. Adam's own body rests there, kept according to divine directions for future resurrection. His physical remains work as a reminder that human identity includes material along with spiritual aspects. Death might separate soul from body for a time, but divine purposes include bringing back complete human nature. Seth creates careful rules for entering the cave and its treasures. Only certain people may go inside, only specific rituals may be done there, only approved reasons justify using the sacred items. These limits protect the treasures from wrong use while keeping them available for proper spiritual needs. The cave becomes a pilgrimage spot for the righteous. Throughout the pre-flood era, families traveled from far settlements to offer prayers at Adam's tomb, to seek divine direction through contact with sacred items, to teach their children about humanity's beginnings and destiny. The long, difficult journey itself becomes spiritual training that readies hearts for divine meeting. Worship gatherings in the cave follow patterns that Seth established under divine direction. Songs that Adam learned in Eden ring through the cavern's chambers. Prayers that preserve divine names and qualities rise toward heaven through natural gaps in the rock. Ceremonies that act out divine promises give hope for those facing current troubles. The sound qualities of the cave improve these worship experiences. Voices travel farther and sound fuller than in open air. Musical instruments make deeper vibrations. Even whispered prayers seem to gain strength from the sacred space. The cave itself becomes a tool of worship that makes human devotion stronger. Seth prepares selected people to work as protectors of the cave and its treasures. These caretakers give their lives to keeping the sacred items safe and maintaining right worship practices. They memorize the stories tied to each treasure. They learn the rituals needed for different spiritual purposes. They get ready for the day when the treasures will serve their final purpose. According to the tradition, these treasures will eventually travel to honor the promised rescuer. The gold will recognize his divine kingship. The frankincense will acknowledge his perfect priesthood. The myrrh will look ahead to his redemptive suffering. The cave works as a storage place for gifts that will be given centuries later at the Messiah's birth. Keeping these treasures through flood and scattering needs careful planning across generations. Each guardian has to train dependable successors. Each generation has to keep the traditions and knowledge required for proper care. The duty passes from father to son through the righteous lineage that goes back to Seth himself. Genealogical records kept in the cave track the passing of this sacred trust through the centuries. Noah gets the treasures before the flood. Shem takes them through the post-flood world. Abraham's descendants maintain the tradition through their wanderings. The line of preservation runs alongside the line of divine promise through history. The cave also works as a library for keeping non-material treasures. Oral traditions that reach back to Eden itself, prophecies gained through divine revelation, wisdom earned through centuries of faithful living. This knowledge proves as precious as any physical item for keeping human connection to divine purposes. Maps carved into the cave walls mark the locations of other sacred places. Where Adam first gave sacrifice after leaving Eden, where Enoch walked with God before his translation, where divine appearances happened to the righteous patriarchs. The cave becomes the geographical center for understanding sacred history across the ancient world. Star observations recorded in the cave give practical knowledge for farming and navigation. The movements of stars and seasons that Adam watched in Eden keep following predictable patterns. Understanding these cycles helps Seth's descendants plan their work in harmony with divine order built into creation itself. Medical knowledge kept in the cave includes facts about healing powers of different plants and minerals. Some of this wisdom comes from experience gained through trial and error, but some comes from divine teaching given to Adam about creation's healing potential. This knowledge helps the community's health needs while pointing toward final healing through divine action. The cave's treasures also include tools and technologies that will be required for future events, directions for building altars, matching divine specifications, methods for preparing sacrifices that please God, ways to build sacred items that help proper worship. This practical knowledge ensures continuity in religious practice through changing situations. During times of persecution, the cave gives refuge for the righteous who face violence from Cain's descendants. Its distant location and hard access protect those seeking shelter there. Its sacred nature discourages enemies from chasing fugitives into its depths. The treasures supply resources for supporting refugees until danger goes away. The tradition of the Cave of Treasures shows how physical items can fulfill spiritual purposes when rightly understood and used. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh are valuable goods in any age, but their greatest value lies in their symbolic meaning and prophetic importance. They stand for divine realities that go beyond material worth. Seth's role as guardian of these treasures creates a pattern for spiritual leadership that stresses service instead of power. He doesn't own the treasures for personal gain. He keeps them for divine purposes that stretch far past his own lifetime. His guardianship models the kind of stewardship that God wants from all who receive divine gifts and duties. Ancient echoes. Seth and Egypt. Deep in the shadow of the pyramids, strange whispers travel through time. Ancient Egyptian writings speak of Set, the god of chaos and storms. Yet beneath this dark figure lies something more layered. Some scholars question if distant memories of Seth, son of Adam, somehow seeped into Egyptian myth over the centuries. The links seem thin at first. Set fights his brother Osiris in Egyptian legends, just as Seth's lines stood separate from Cain's violent way. But where biblical Seth brought order and worship, Egyptian Set represented discord. The names share similar sounds, yet their natures look opposite. Ancient Egyptian records tell of foreign peoples arriving in the Nile Valley in earliest times. These newcomers carried stories, traditions, and memories of their ancestors. Among them might have been tales of the righteous son who took the place of the fallen brother. Over generations, these stories changed shape. What started as memory of Seth the faithful became Seth the turbulent. The change follows a pattern visible throughout history. Sacred stories move across cultures, shifting form as they travel. The original Seth, quiet, faithful, chosen by God, moves into new lands and new languages. Local customs remake his image. Cultural requirements redefine his role. Soon, the peaceful son becomes something completely different. Egyptian writings from the earliest dynasties hint at this process. They mention ancient wisdom arriving from the east, brought by wandering peoples. These groups settled in the delta regions, bringing their gods and stories with them. Their tales mixed with local beliefs, building new myths from old truths. The timing matches biblical chronology in interesting ways. If Seth's descendants spread across the ancient world before the flood, their stories would have survived in scattered forms. Egyptian civilization rising after the Great Deluge might have kept these fragments in changed form. The righteous Seth became the chaotic, set through generations of retelling. Archaeological evidence backs up this pattern of cultural mixing. Pre-dynastic Egyptian artifacts show influences from Mesopotamian regions where biblical events happened. Trade routes moved more than goods. They carried stories, beliefs, and memories of ancient times. Seth's legacy might have traveled these same paths, becoming Egyptian Set along the way. The difference between biblical Seth and Egyptian Set shows how stories adjust to fulfill different purposes. Egypt needed gods who explained conflict and justified royal power. The peaceful Seth wouldn't fit these needs, so he became Set, still powerful, still significant, but serving Egypt's cultural requirements instead of keeping his original nature. Still, traces of the original Seth continue even in Egyptian myth. Set isn't completely evil, but fulfills divine purposes within cosmic order. He guards the sun god's boat during its nightly trip through the underworld. This protective role echoes Seth's biblical function as guardian of the righteous line. Both figures in their own ways keep something precious safe against dark powers. The language connections grow stronger with closer study. Ancient Egyptian and Hebrew share common Semitic roots. Names and concepts cross between these languages more easily than modern scholars once thought. Seth's name could naturally become Set through normal sound changes over centuries of cultural contact. Other similarities emerge from careful study. Both Seth and Set connect with divine appointment and special selection. Both stand separate from their brothers in meaningful ways. Both carry duties that affect the whole cosmic order. These deeper similarities point to real historical links beneath surface differences. The Egyptian writings keep one especially striking detail. Set is sometimes called the Appointed One, a title that mirrors Eve's words when Seth was born. She declared that God had appointed another seed to replace Abel. This shared idea of divine appointment suggests common origins for both figures. Modern Egyptologists keep debating these connections. Some see pure chance in the similarities. Others argue for real historical ties between biblical traditions and Egyptian mythology. The evidence permits both interpretations, leaving room for wonder about how ancient stories traveled and transformed. What seems clear is that Seth's influence reached far past the pages of Scripture. His story, like ripples in still water, spread outward across the ancient world. Each culture it touched kept some fragment of the original truth, even as it adapted that truth to local needs and understandings. The sons of God and the daughters of men. A darkness starts to spread across the earth. The line of Seth, once pure and separate, begins to weaken. Ancient writings describe a cosmic seduction that will doom the world. The sons of God look at the daughters of men and find them beautiful. This simple phrase holds the weight of humanity's greatest catastrophe. The identity of these sons of God has confused scholars for thousands of years. Some traditions call them angels who left their heavenly positions. Others see them as descendants of Seth who forgot their sacred calling. Both interpretations point to the same tragic outcome: the collapse of divine order on earth. Seth's lineage had kept its separation from Cain's violent descendants for generations. They lived apart in the mountains, close to God, keeping the memory of Eden and the hope of restoration. Their lives were defined by worship, righteousness, and divine communion. They were the chosen guardians of spiritual truth in a darkening world. But isolation creates curiosity. As centuries went by, some among Seth's descendants started wondering about life in the valleys below. There, Cain's children had constructed glittering cities filled with art, music, and technological wonders. Their women were beautiful, their culture refined, their lives apparently full of pleasure and comfort. The temptation increased with each generation. Young men from Seth's line would climb down from the sacred mountains. At first, they came only to trade or watch. They told themselves they would stay separate, untouched by the corruption below. They believed their righteousness would shield them from moral infection. Slowly, the boundaries melted away. Marriages started between the two lines. Seth's descendants, chosen to keep divine truth, joined themselves with those who had turned away from God's ways. The ancient separation that had protected both bloodlines suddenly broke down. Sacred and profane blended into something neither purely holy nor completely corrupt. The outcomes went past anyone's worst nightmares. From these unions came children of unusual size and strength, beings the writings call Nephilim, or fallen ones. These giants inherited physical power from their mother's bloodline and spiritual knowledge from their father's heritage. They used both gifts for destruction instead of blessing. The Nephilim became warlords and tyrants. Their unnatural strength let them dominate normal humans. Their inherited knowledge gave them access to secrets that should have stayed hidden. They taught forbidden arts, sorcery, warfare, and technologies too dangerous for fallen humanity to hold. Violence multiplied across the earth under their influence. Divine knowledge, meant to uplift and bless, became a weapon of oppression in their hands. They twisted worship into dark rituals. They turned healing arts into tools of harm. They used their understanding of natural forces to terrorize and control. What God had planned for good became weaponized for evil. The corruption spread like a plague. Cities that had once made beautiful art now built monuments to cruelty. Technologies that could have blessed humanity served only to increase suffering. Even the earth itself seemed to rebel against the twisted order the Nephilim created. Natural disasters grew as creation groaned under the weight of cosmic rebellion. Seth's remaining descendants found themselves swamped by the tide of corruption. Their small communities of faithful worshippers shrank as more young people left the mountains for the attractions below. The sacred traditions that had kept divine truth for centuries started to fade. Knowledge of God grew dim as the light of righteousness flickered toward extinction. Yet not everything was lost. A faithful remnant stayed, led by figures like Enoch and later Noah. These few kept the essential truths, even as darkness swallowed the world around them. They maintained the sacred flame that would finally kindle hope in a new world after judgment cleaned the old. The angelic interpretation of this story adds another layer of cosmic tragedy. If the sons of God were actually heavenly beings, then their fall represents a catastrophe that went beyond human failure. Angels who had witnessed divine glory chose earthly pleasure over eternal purpose. Their rebellion infected not just humanity, but the very boundary between heaven and earth. Ancient writings like the Book of Enoch expand on this cosmic disaster. They describe how fallen angels taught humans forbidden knowledge, the secrets of metalworking for making weapons, cosmetics for enhancing beauty, astronomy for practicing magic. Each gift corrupted its receiver, leading humanity farther from divine purpose into selfish ambition. The timing of this catastrophe proved crucial for human history. It happened after centuries of growth and development. But before divine judgment could be delayed. Humanity had advanced enough to make the corruption truly dangerous, but had not yet reached the point where redemption became impossible. The flood would arrive just as the last hope seemed ready to die. This period represents the first great test of human nature under divine election. Seth's line had been chosen, blessed, and set apart. They held every advantage for keeping righteousness. Yet they chose to abandon their calling for temporary pleasures. Their failure showed that divine election alone couldn't guarantee faithfulness without continued submission to God's will. Warnings of the flood. The signs multiply across a darkening world. Prophets rise among the few who still remember God's voice. Their warnings echo through valleys where giants rule and corruption spreads like wildfire. The most faithful among Seth's descendants receive visions of coming judgment. Water will cover the earth. Only those who pay attention to the warning will survive. Enoch stands as the greatest of these prophetic voices. His walks with God have shown him visions of cosmic justice. He sees the corruption that poisons creation and grasps its inevitable end. His prophecies speak of divine wrath stored up for the ungodly. The earth itself cries out for cleansing from the violence that stains its soil. The prophet's words carry supernatural authority. When Enoch speaks, creation itself seems to listen. Birds fall silent, winds stop their blowing. Even the Nephilim pause their violence when his voice rings across the land. Yet few truly grasp the magnitude of what approaches. Most dismiss his warnings as the ravings of a mountain mystic. Ancient writings keep fragments of these early prophecies. They speak of waters rising higher than the highest peaks. They describe a cosmic reset that will wash away every trace of current civilization. They promise salvation for the righteous while declaring doom upon the wicked. The specificity of these visions suggests divine revelation instead of human guesswork. Enoch's prophetic ministry covers decades, growing more urgent as corruption increases. He travels from the sacred mountains down into the polluted valleys. His messages adjust to each audience while keeping their essential truth. To the Nephilim, he announces coming judgment. To the remnant of Seth's line, he offers hope for preservation through obedience. The prophet's method of gaining revelation sets him apart from ordinary human experience. He doesn't merely hear God's voice, but walks in divine presence. These encounters carry him beyond normal reality into heavenly realms. There, he witnesses the preparations for judgment already happening in cosmic courts of justice. His visions show the spiritual machinery behind coming destruction. Angels receive their assignments to carry out divine wrath. Heavenly storage places prepare the waters of judgment. Even the calendar of destruction becomes clear, though Enoch shares these specific details only with his most faithful followers. The content of Enoch's prophecies goes beyond simple warnings of flood. He describes the spiritual reasons for judgment. Humanity has corrupted the divine image through mixing with fallen beings. The earth has been polluted by innocent blood. Knowledge meant for blessing has been twisted into cursing. Creation itself demands cleansing. Yet mercy mixes with justice in these prophetic messages. Enoch speaks not only of destruction, but of preservation. A righteous remnant will survive the coming deluge. From them, God will rebuild human civilization on pure foundations. The flood represents not an ending, but a new beginning for humanity's relationship with the divine. Other prophets join Enoch's voice as the crisis deepens. Methuselah, his son, continues the prophetic tradition. His extraordinarily long life works as a living sign of divine patience. As long as Methuselah lives, judgment stays delayed. His eventual death will signal that the time of grace has ended. The prophetic warnings grow more specific as the flood gets closer. Enoch's visions show the chosen instrument of preservation. One man from Seth's pure lineage will receive divine directions for survival. This chosen one will build a vessel capable of keeping life safe through the coming catastrophe. His obedience will determine whether humanity has any future at all. The prophecies also address the reach of coming judgment. The flood will be universal, covering every part of the inhabited earth. No mountain will stay above the waters, no refuge will escape the divine wrath. Only those inside the divinely designed vessel will survive to see the new world that follows destruction. Enoch's final prophecies speak of what lies past the flood. The cleansed earth will receive a new covenant. Humanity will start again with knowledge of divine justice. The memory of judgment will work as warning for future generations. Yet the tendency toward corruption will remain, requiring continued watchfulness and divine grace. The prophet's mysterious departure from earth, works as the ultimate confirmation of his message. God takes Enoch straight into divine presence without experiencing death. This translation proves that the spiritual realities he proclaimed are genuine. His removal from earth also signals that the time for warnings is ending. Soon, only judgment will remain. The scattered remnant of Seth's faithful descendants treasure these prophetic warnings. They share them in whispered conversations during the darkest hours. Some begin making practical preparations based on Enoch's visions. They gather supplies, strengthen their families, and deepen their worship. They sense that the old world is ending, and a new one must soon begin. Yet even among the faithful, doubt sometimes creeps in. Generations have heard warnings of coming judgment. Life continues its normal patterns despite prophetic urgency. The human heart struggles to grasp catastrophe on the scale Enoch describes. This psychological resistance will make Noah's eventual obedience even more remarkable. Enter Noah. In the 10th generation from Adam, hope takes human form. Noah enters a world teetering on the edge of divine judgment. Born into Seth's faithful lineage, he carries within his blood the memory of Eden and the promise of redemption. His very name whispers of comfort and rest, qualities desperately needed in a time of cosmic upheaval. His father, Lamech, prophesies over the newborn child. This son will bring relief from the curse that has plagued the earth since Adam's fall. Through him, the ground will yield its increase again. The labor that has grown harsh under divine judgment will become bearable once more. These words prove more prophetic than anyone could imagine. Noah grows up hearing stories of the ancient days when men walked closer to God. His grandfather Methuselah, still alive after 9 centuries, remembers when the line of Seth kept its separation from corruption. The old man's tales paint pictures of a purer time when divine presence felt near and righteousness seemed reachable. The young Noah watches the accelerating decay around him. Giants roam the valleys below his mountain home. Violence erupts daily in the cities of the plains. Even among his own people, fewer maintain the ancient ways of worship and separation. The darkness that Enoch prophesied continues to spread across the inhabited world. Yet something sets Noah apart from his contemporaries. While others drift toward compromise, he moves deeper into faithfulness. Where his generation abandons the old ways, he embraces them more fully. His righteousness stands out like a beacon in the gathering gloom. God takes notice of this solitary figure walking uprightly in a corrupt generation. The divine evaluation of Noah's character becomes crucial for humanity's survival. Scripture records that God finds him righteous in his generation, not perfect by absolute standards, but faithful among the unfaithful. His integrity preserves him when divine wrath consumes everyone else. His obedience qualifies him to become the new father of humanity after judgment cleanses the earth. Baden Sishuwufen. Noah's moral uprightness shows itself in tangible ways. He upholds fairness in his commercial transactions while others engage in fraud and theft. He tells the truth when falsehoods appear more advantageous. He gives worship to God alone while those around him bow down to things that were created. His household reflects divine structure when disorder reigns in every other place. This steady moral character draws divine notice at exactly the perfect time. God requires a collaborator for the magnificent work of protecting and renewing life. The heavenly design needs a human representative who can be entrusted with tremendous responsibility. Noah's demonstrated integrity makes him suitable for this unparalleled position in holy history. The choosing of Noah shows us divine patterns in moving through the ages. God seldom selects the mighty or the renowned for the most critical assignments. Rather, divine favor rests upon those who are devoted and unknown. Noah controls no military forces, governs no urban centers, possesses no immense wealth. He carries only moral soundness, willing submission, and readiness to rely on heavenly direction, even when it appears unreasonable. His years of life, when selected, 600, point to divine forbearance and human extended lifespan in the world before the Great Flood. Noah has enjoyed centuries to demonstrate his moral fiber. His virtue has endured examination through extended decades of observing wickedness multiply. He has stood firm while others surrounding him forsook the old paths. The divine selection of Noah further reveals God's dedication to maintaining the descendants of Seth. In spite of widespread falling away among the chosen family line, God refuses to let it vanish entirely. A single devoted man becomes the connection between the former age and the coming one. Through his life, the commitments given to Seth will outlast the approaching disaster. Noah's appointment brings immense obligation. The continuation of every breathing creature rests upon his compliance. His readiness to obey heavenly commands, regardless of how peculiar they appear, will settle whether humanity possesses any tomorrow. The magnitude of this mission would overwhelm a typical person. Noah's remarkable moral strength allows him to shoulder it. The moment of Noah's summons proves vital. He obtains his heavenly assignment precisely when wickedness reaches its zenith. The Nephilim have secured their rule across the majority of the planet. Brutality saturates the land, from border to border. The handful of remaining virtuous individuals feel swamped by the flood of wickedness. Into this dire circumstance, God addresses his selected servant. The first divine message to Noah must have appeared simultaneously frightening and marvelous. Following generations of growing silence from the heavens, God communicates unmistakably once more. The voice that strolled with Adam in the garden, that received Abel's offering, that transported Enoch into splendor, now speaks to Noah in a direct manner. The closeness of this exchange confirms Noah's lifelong devotion. God's announcement to Noah blends caution with assurance. Condemnation approaches the planet, yet protection is likewise arranged. Annihilation will be complete, though rescue will be supplied for those who heed heavenly guidance. The former age will terminate, yet a fresh age will commence. Noah occupies the pivotal position between two epochs of human existence. The divine blueprint disclosed to Noah expresses both righteousness and compassion. Righteousness requires that wickedness be washed from existence. Compassion furnishes a pathway for existence to persist past condemnation. Noah turns into the channel through which both heavenly characteristics discover expression. His compliance allows God to be simultaneously righteous and compassionate. The construction of the vessel, God communicates with numerical exactness. The craft must extend 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in width, 30 cubits in height, with 3 levels, a single window, a single entrance. The details emerge from heavenly understanding, flawlessly determined for the assignment lying ahead. Noah obtains construction plans that no human intelligence could have conceived. Each dimension fulfills a function in the magnificent scheme of protection. The directions appear unachievable initially. Construct a watercraft where no substantial body of water can be found. Build a floating menagerie in an environment that has never witnessed such rainfall. Gather supplies for animals that have never required deliverance. The undertaking looks like insanity to anyone watching from the sidelines. Nevertheless, Noah commences without pause or uncertainty. The labor requires materials beyond any person's typical capacity. Enormous timber pieces must be collected from faraway woodlands. Tar must be obtained to seal the gigantic hull. Equipment must be created for building on this extraordinary magnitude. Noah's household provides labor, though the enterprise demands heavenly provision for completion. Decades elapse as the enormous craft gradually assumes form. Noah matures from 600 years toward his appointment with fate. His palms become hardened from unending building labor. His spine curves under the burden of innumerable timber loads. Still, his resolve never falters. He constructs as someone who has received words from the Almighty. The bodily difficulties become insignificant compared to the psychological weight. Those living nearby ridicule the peculiar vessel rising among them. Previous acquaintances challenge Noah's mental state. Even certain relatives question whether the elderly man has become unhinged. The derision intensifies with each advancing year as the vessel expands and the anticipated deluge continues not arriving. Noah's devotion throughout this stretch reveals the extent of his confidence in heavenly communication. He persists in building when circumstances indicate foolishness. He carries on when ridicule transforms into harassment. He preserves optimism when physical conditions provide no justification for his behavior. His compliance goes beyond human logic and depends entirely on heavenly commitment. The building sequence instructs Noah regarding heavenly approaches. God possessed the ability to have formed the vessel immediately through supernatural force. Rather, the heavenly strategy demands human partnership and decades of devoted labor. The construction interval functions as a season of readiness for both Noah and the observing population. It creates chances for turning away from sin that mostly go disregarded. As the vessel approaches readiness, its enormous proportions become impossible to deny. The craft towers over any building previously erected by human effort. Its measurements hint at intentions beyond typical comprehension. Reflective observers start wondering whether Noah could genuinely understand something they have overlooked. Still, the majority persist in rejecting the undertaking as an elaborate fantasy. The vessel's structure discloses heavenly mechanics, surpassing human talents. Its measurements deliver ideal balance for surviving brutal tempests. Its division arrangement permits effective arrangement of innumerable animal varieties. Its airflow design guarantees sufficient oxygen movement across the craft. Every aspect mirrors supernatural intelligence applied to physical laws. Noah's household transforms into his chief workforce as the endeavor moves forward. His male children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, offer their physical strength to the immense task. Their spouses assist in organizing the inside areas and collecting provisions. The entire family group dedicates itself to the heavenly objective, in spite of community pressure to desert the apparently unattainable assignment. The waterproofing procedure demands particular focus. The craft must stay sealed against waters more turbulent than any vessel has previously encountered. Tar blankets every connection and junction. Repeated applications guarantee total defense against the approaching torrent. Noah grasps that any opening could become deadly to the valuable cargo he will transport. Years of building cultivate Noah's abilities as an expert builder. He acquires methods for handling massive wood pieces. He becomes skilled in the practice of forming watertight connections. He creates procedures for relocating weighty substances productively. The undertaking changes him from agriculturist to vessel constructor through requirement and heavenly direction. The vessel's finishing draws near as Noah marks his 600th birthday. Each board settles flawlessly in its designated position. Each connection remains secure against pressure evaluation. Each section stands prepared to accept its assigned inhabitants. The craft embodies 6 decades of devoted compliance, made solid in physical shape. Heavenly scheduling demonstrates perfection in all aspects. The vessel achieves completion exactly as wickedness on the planet achieves its maximum. Noah completes his construction exactly as God's tolerance achieves its limit. The craft stands ready exactly as the instant for condemnation comes. Human compliance and heavenly righteousness meet at precisely the correct instant. The finished vessel functions as a tribute to trust in an era of doubt. It proves that heavenly orders, regardless of how peculiar they appear, merit complete compliance. It confirms that God's commitments stay reliable even when situations indicate differently. It exists as testimony that heavenly understanding exceeds human comprehension in all generations. Local residents persist in their typical pursuits in spite of the immense watercraft among them. They sow crops for yields they will never collect. They create arrangements for tomorrows that will never materialize. They disregard the most obvious potential caution of approaching condemnation. Their inability to see evident indicators shows how thoroughly wickedness has clouded human perception. Noah's construction endeavor changes from demonstration of trust into mechanism of deliverance. What started as compliance to apparently unachievable heavenly orders becomes the craft that safeguards existence through disastrous condemnation. The vessel embodies the truth that heavenly guidance, regardless of how peculiar it looks, constantly fulfills intentions beyond human understanding. The great deluge, rainfall, starts descending, not the mild precipitation that irrigates the planet in typical seasons, but droplets that impact like mallets against the vessel's closed deck. The atmosphere becomes dark until daytime grows impossible to distinguish from darkness. What commences as strange climate rapidly shows itself as something significantly more disastrous. The springs of the immense depths explode open. The portals of the sky swing broadly. Water plummets from overhead, while at the same time bursting forth from underneath. Noah and his household huddle within the craft that has consumed their attention for decades. The noises outside become horrifying. Water hammers against the vessel's exterior with mounting intensity. The enormous watercraft starts shifting, elevated by ascending floods from its waterless resting position. For the initial time since building started, the massive craft fulfills its designated function. The waters climb with supernatural velocity. Low areas fill initially, then elevated ground vanishes under the expanding deluge. The urban centers of the flatlands, carrying all their brutality and wickedness, disappear beneath heavenly condemnation. The giants who intimidate the planet discover their enormous power, ineffective against the unstoppable surge. All that inhales air starts dying as the water height keeps ascending. Within the vessel, Noah's household feels dread combined with confirmation. Their decades of trust now demonstrate warranted, though at a nearly insufferable price. Through the solitary opening, they observe the obliteration of all things recognizable. The environment they understood dissolves into disorder and mortality. Only their compliance to heavenly instruction shields them from experiencing the universal outcome. The creatures within the vessel detect the universal disturbance surrounding them. Animals that would typically escape from hunters cluster together in mutual dread. The heavenly tranquility that guided them to Noah preserves arrangement within the craft. Even as disorder dominates outside, their continuation relies completely on the floating refuge God planned for this instant. 40 days of rainfall constitutes merely the start. The waters keep climbing well beyond when the initial torrent concludes. Each mountain summit vanishes under the complete deluge. The tallest elevations transform into invisible burial sites. The planet changes into an infinite ocean, with no observable reference points surviving. The former age has been wiped away thoroughly. The mental strain on Noah's household increases nearly beyond tolerance. They constitute the exclusive human survivors of a universal disaster. All individuals they have previously encountered outside their close relatives have died. The separation feels absolute and terrifying. They drift isolated on a boundless ocean, depending exclusively on heavenly assurance that solid ground will eventually return. Months elapse in this water-covered wilderness. The vessel transforms into their complete reality, containing all surviving existence on the planet. Daylight succeeds daylight, with no alteration in the infinite water extending to each boundary. Duration appears halted between the environment that existed and the environment that could still emerge. They occupy a transitional realm between annihilation and restoration. The bodily difficulties of existence aboard the vessel increase as weeks transform into months. Nourishment provisions demand cautious distribution. Animal refuse must be handled in spite of confined areas. Pure water turns valuable in spite of the deluge encircling them. All facets of continuation require persistent focus and heavenly provision. Heavenly recollection shatters the deadlock. God recalls Noah and each breathing creature accompanying him in the vessel. This recollection activates universal powers that invert the deluge's advancement. A breeze starts moving across the waters. The springs of the depths seal their openings. The portals of the sky close firmly. The complete ocean starts its gradual withdrawal. The vessel settles on the mountains of Ararat, following 150 days adrift. The mild impact against firm ground delivers the initial optimism that their hardship could be concluding. Still, water continues, blanketing the planet as distantly as they can observe. Ground exists somewhere under the deluge, though whether it will ever resurface stays doubtful. Noah releases birds to evaluate the waters. A raven soars to and fro, discovering no landing position. A dove comes back without results on its initial assignment. 7 days subsequently, the identical dove retrieves an olive branch, the initial confirmation that plant life has started recovering. 7 additional days transpire before the dove neglects to come back, showing that appropriate habitat has been re-established. The extended imprisonment ultimately concludes following more than a year within the vessel. Noah takes away the covering and observes waterless ground spreading away from their mountain sanctuary. The planet looks immensely altered from the environment they recall. The recognizable reference points have been removed. Fresh geography has surfaced from under the withdrawing waters. They must acquire how to exist in a changed creation. The initial action following departure from the vessel establishes the character for the fresh environment. Noah constructs an altar and presents offerings from the unblemished creatures. The pleasant fragrance ascends before God like incense, conveying appreciation for protection and petitions for heavenly favor on the new start. This reverence creates the correct connection between Maker and creation in the world following the deluge. Heavenly reaction to Noah's offering creates fresh standards for the persisting environment. God commits never once more to obliterate the planet by deluge. The rainbow materializes as an indicator of this agreement, observable to all generations that succeed. The periodic cycles will persist their consistent pattern. Planting season and gathering season will not stop while the planet remains. Still, the deluge alters more than terrain. The world before the flood of extended existences and immediate heavenly interaction has concluded. Human life durations start their consistent reduction from centuries to decades. The closeness between the heavens and the planet, harmed by initial transgression and destroyed by wickedness, will not be completely renewed until a superior deliverance arrives. The condemnation of the deluge reveals both heavenly righteousness and kindness. Righteousness requires that wickedness be washed from existence. Kindness supplies deliverance for those who rely on heavenly commitments. Noah and his household connect the distance between the environment that merited condemnation and the environment that obtains a fresh opportunity. Through their lives, humanity receives chance to commence once more. Consequences and fresh starts. The planet rests vacant and quiet. Waters have withdrawn, departing behind an environment cleansed thoroughly of its previous wickedness. Noah's household stands isolated on Mount Ararat, 8 individuals who must now reconstruct human culture from emptiness. The assignment appears crushing. They hold no urban centers, no gathered information, no created traditions. All things must start once more from the foundation upward. God communicates into this untouched vacancy with expressions of favor and assignment. The heavenly instruction provided to Adam resounds once more for Noah and his offspring. Become abundant and increase. Occupy the planet and master it. Exercise authority over each breathing creature. The initial intention for humanity stays unaltered in spite of the disastrous interruption of the deluge. Still, subtle alterations characterize this fresh start. Mortality penetrates the physical arrangement more thoroughly than previously. Creatures will now experience dread of humans as never in earlier times. The authorization to consume flesh recognizes that brutality has turned into portion of the physical pattern. The Rainbow Agreement commits no additional complete deluges, though likewise acknowledges that such overwhelming condemnation became required. Noah's initial action creates reverence as the basis of the fresh environment. The altar constructed from rocks collected on the mountain transforms into humanity's initial worship building following the deluge. Vapor from consuming offerings ascends into the purified atmosphere, transporting petitions of appreciation and appeals for heavenly favor. This emphasis of reverence establishes the correct arrangement for all things that succeed. The tangible difficulties of continuation require prompt focus. Nourishment must be discovered or cultivated in a terrain changed by deluge. Protection must be constructed from whatever substances the ravaged planet supplies. Creatures must be permitted to increase and distribute across the vacant land masses. The labor of refilling and reconstructing commences right away. Noah cultivates a vineyard in the fresh environment, attempting to re-establish some recognizable ease from the former age. The vines develop in earth, enhanced by the biological substance of a submerged culture. When collection season comes, Noah samples wine for the initial occasion since boarding the vessel. Maybe overwhelmed by comfort at continuation or attempting to erase the terrors he observed, he consumes excessively and collapses into a disgraceful condition. This occurrence shows that human character outlasted the deluge unaltered. The wickedness that rendered condemnation required stays present in the hearts of the delivered. Noah's virtue shielded him through disaster, though did not change him into flawless goodness. The fresh environment will encounter the identical moral difficulties that obliterated the former age. Ham's reaction to his father's exposed state reveals how rapidly transgression reasserts itself. Rather than blanketing Noah's disgrace with care, Ham reveals it to his male siblings. This demonstration of disrespect toward his father mirrors the contempt that distinguished the world before the deluge. The sequence of wickedness starts repeating within a solitary generation of deliverance. Shem and Japheth manage the circumstance with appropriate respect. They step backward to blanket their father without gazing upon his disgrace. This considerate conduct gains them favor, while Ham's descendants obtain prophetic condemnation. Even in the fresh environment, selections regarding respect and contempt transport enduring results for complete family descendants. Noah's prophetic expressions over his three male children form the coming advancement of human culture. Shem obtains favor as the individual through whom heavenly intention will persist. Japheth will broaden and occupy in Shem's dwellings, indicating collaboration and favor. Ham's offspring, Canaan, encounters servitude, showing the price of disrespecting one's father and, through extension, heavenly power. The agreement created with Noah reaches beyond his close relatives to include all existence. God commits never once more to obliterate the planet by deluge, irrespective of human conduct. This one-sided dedication guarantees consistency for the physical arrangement. Periodic cycles will persist their patterns. The planet will stay productive. The fundamental circumstances for culture are assured. The rainbow functions as an observable indicator of this universal agreement. Each occasion, tempest formations assemble and pose destructive rainfall. The multicolored arc materializes as reminder of heavenly limitation. Young ones in all generations will observe this indicator and receive the account of condemnation outlasted through heavenly kindness. The observable reminder safeguards the recollection of both deluge and deliverance. Human life durations start their slow reduction in the world following the deluge. Noah exists 950 years, nearly equaling life duration before the deluge, though his offspring encounter progressively briefer existences. This alteration could stem from atmospheric distinctions in the fresh environment, or it could embody heavenly kindness, restricting exposure to a corrupted reality. Regardless, the alteration designates a clear separation between the former environment and the fresh one. The spreading of Noah's household across the planet accomplishes the heavenly order to occupy and master it. From the mountains of Ararat, they distribute in all paths. Each cluster transports recollections of the deluge and the agreement that succeeded. These accounts transform into the establishment narratives of cultures across the globe, safeguarding resonances of the magnificent condemnation and deliverance. Archaeological findings indicate rapid atmospheric alteration succeeding some historical disastrous occurrence. Frozen periods transition, ocean heights modify, landmass arrangements stabilize into their present shapes. While these alterations could possess physical clarifications, they correspond remarkably thoroughly with the scriptural description of an environment-changing deluge succeeded by slow restoration. The fresh environment provides humanity an unmarked beginning, though likewise transports ahead the instructions of the former age. Heavenly righteousness cannot be ridiculed without limit. Wickedness transports results that ultimately require settlement. Still, heavenly kindness furnishes deliverance for those who rely and comply. These realities acquired through disaster direct human conduct in the centuries that succeed. Cultural recollections of the magnificent deluge continue in cultures across the globe. From ancient Near Eastern epics to indigenous American traditions, accounts of universal condemnation by water materialize in nearly all human societies. These broad descriptions indicate shared recollection of a genuine historical occurrence, safeguarded in spoken tradition across the centuries of human, spreading from a shared origin. Seth's inheritance through Shem, among Noah's three male children, Shem transports ahead the most holy possession. His designation signifies name or standing, indicating the respect that will progress through his descendants. The favor declared over him by his father appoints him as the channel through which heavenly intention will persist. In Shem, the spiritual essence of Seth discovers its expression following the deluge. The genealogical documentation follows heavenly commitment through Shem's offspring with meticulous exactness. From his line arrives Arpachshad, then Shelah, then Eber, whose designation produces the term Hebrew. Each generation preserves the holy connection in spite of the difficulties of reconstructing culture in a changed environment. The succession of commitment outlasts both deluge and the social influences of fresh locations. Shem's offspring established themselves in the territories eastward of the Mediterranean, in regions that will subsequently become recognized as Mesopotamia and Canaan. Their selections of position demonstrate providential, positioning them at the intersection of historical commerce pathways. From these advantageous positions, the impact of Seth's spiritual inheritance can distribute across the advancing globe. The Tower of Babel occurrence evaluates Shem's descendants in manners reminiscent of the wickedness before the deluge. Humanity combines in defiance against heavenly instruction to distribute across the planet. Rather than occupying and mastering the environment, they assemble to construct a tribute to their personal magnificence. The enormous tower embodies the identical arrogance that distinguished Cain's offspring before the deluge. Heavenly interference disperses the aspiring tower constructors through bewilderment of speech. This condemnation shields the planet from a premature combination founded on defiance instead of virtue. Shem's offspring, apparently preserving their devotion to heavenly orders, obtain their personal speech and region. They transport ahead the recollection of genuine reverence, while alternative clusters drift into false worship. The social transmission through Shem's succession safeguards crucial realities that could differently be misplaced. Accounts of formation, corruption, deluge, and agreement transfer from father to male child across the generations. These spoken customs preserve their precision through cautious repetition and profound respect for ancestral understanding. The spiritual possession demonstrates more precious than physical riches. Shem personally exists 500 years following the deluge, sufficiently extended to observe his offspring distribute across enormous regions. His prolonged life duration permits him to function as a breathing connection between the environment before the deluge and the surfacing cultures of the fresh planet. His recollections of the historical wickedness and heavenly condemnation supply caution for coming generations. The genealogical documentation displays a continuous reduction in life durations among Shem's offspring. When Noah existed nearly 1,000 years, his great-great-grandson Peleg observes merely 2 centuries and 39 years. This slow shortening of existence could mirror atmospheric alterations in the world following the deluge, or it could embody heavenly kindness, restricting exposure to a corrupted reality. 10 generations following Noah, Abraham surfaces from Shem's descendants in the urban center of Ur. His summons from heavenly voice designates a vital turning moment in the safeguarding of Seth's spiritual inheritance. Through Abraham, the dispersed recollection of genuine reverence will be assembled into a selected population. The commitment provided to Seth will discover fresh expression in the agreement with Abraham and his offspring. The scheduling of Abraham's summons demonstrates important. It transpires when the recollection of the deluge has started fading. False worship distributes across the planet as individuals disregard the instructions of heavenly condemnation. Even in Mesopotamia, where recollection should be most powerful, the reverence of incorrect deities displaces respect for the genuine Maker. Abraham's devotion radiates like a light in assembling obscurity. Abraham's readiness to depart his native land mirrors the division that distinguished Seth's succession from the start. Exactly as Seth's offspring had previously resided separated from Cain's wicked culture, Abraham divides himself from the idol-worshipping society of his origin. He transforms into a traveler in compliance to heavenly summons, depending on commitments that appear unachievable to accomplish. The agreement created with Abraham restores and broadens the commitments implicit in Seth's appointment. Abraham will transform into the ancestor of populations. His offspring will be as innumerable as celestial bodies in the atmosphere. Through his descendants, all households of the planet will obtain favor. These magnificent commitments mirror and magnify the optimism that started with Seth's origin following Abel's mortality. Isaac's origin to aged parents reveals heavenly capacity to accomplish unachievable commitments. Exactly as Seth had substituted the murdered Abel, Isaac substitutes the descendant of commitment who appeared unachievable to produce. The sequence of heavenly supply persists across the centuries, displaying that God's intentions cannot be prevented by physical restrictions or human breakdown. The near offering of Isaac evaluates Abraham's trust in manners that mirror the examinations encountered by Seth's descendants across existence. Abraham must select between physical attachment and heavenly instruction. His readiness to present his male child reveals the identical reliance that allowed Noah to construct a vessel on waterless ground. Devotion to heavenly communication goes beyond human comprehension or inclination. Jacob's struggling with the messenger and his change into the individual who contends with God persists the spiritual expedition that started with Seth. Similar to his ancestor who was appointed to substitute a corrupted sibling, Jacob obtains a fresh designation and character through heavenly meeting. His 12 male children transform into the founding fathers of a selected population that will shield heavenly reality for all humanity. The account of Joseph reveals how heavenly guidance operates through visible disaster to achieve redemptive intention. His siblings' envy produces bondage in Egypt. Still, this apparent disaster positions him to rescue his relatives from starvation. The sequence mirrors the broader account of Seth's succession. Visible obstacles fulfill heavenly intentions that transform into obvious, merely in hindsight. The safeguarding of Jacob's relatives in Egypt throughout the magnificent starvation guarantees the continuation of Seth's spiritual inheritance at a vital instant. Without Joseph's governing understanding and Pharaoh's approval, the selected descendants could have died. Heavenly guidance shields the transporters of commitment, even when they remain unaware of the broader intention being fulfilled. The increase of Jacob's offspring in Egypt accomplishes the commitment of innumerable descendants, while likewise forming circumstances for coming liberation. Their expansion from 70 individuals to maybe 2 million individuals reveals heavenly devotion to the agreement. Still, their ultimate captivity likewise shows that physical situations cannot assure protection. Only heavenly favor supplies ultimate shielding. Moses surfaces from this enslaved population as the subsequent magnificent connection in Seth's spiritual sequence. His meeting with the consuming vegetation mirrors the heavenly interactions that directed Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. The God who addresses Moses recognizes himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the identical heavenly voice that has directed Seth's descendants across existence. The departure from Egypt embodies the most spectacular revelation of heavenly capacity since the deluge. Through Moses, God liberates his selected population from captivity and creates them as a population. The regulations provided at Mount Sinai arrange the moral realities that Seth's offspring had shielded through spoken custom. Inscribed communication supplements, the spiritual possession transferred down through generations of devoted households. From Seth to Christ, the Gospel of Luke follows in continuous succession from Adam through Seth down to Jesus of Nazareth. This genealogical thread interlaces through 77 generations, linking the appointed male child of Eve to the committed Messiah. All designations embody a connection in the sequence of heavenly intention that started when Seth substituted the murdered Abel. Luke's cautious recording fulfills more than historical curiosity. The evangelist proves that Jesus belongs to the authentic spiritual descendants that has transported heavenly commitment since the start. Through Seth's succession, the optimism of liberation has been shielded across thousands of years. In Christ, that historical optimism discovers its supreme accomplishment. The theological importance of this link extends deeper than simple ancestry. Seth was appointed to substitute Abel following Cain's brutality, obliterated the initial attempt at virtuous reverence. Christ arrives to substitute Adam following transgression, obliterated humanity's initial connection with God. Both individuals fulfill as heavenly appointments to re-establish what was misplaced through human breakdown. Early Christian authors acknowledged these similarities with profound perception. They observed Seth as a representation of Christ, an individual whose existence and intention anticipated the superior deliverance to arrive. Where Seth shielded bodily existence through the deluge, Christ shields spiritual existence through condemnation. Where Seth's offspring Noah delivered a surviving group in the vessel, Christ delivers believers through his execution. The scheduling of Christ's materialization accomplishes the identical sequence of heavenly forbearance and interference observed across Seth's descendants. Exactly as Noah materialized when wickedness achieved its maximum, Christ penetrates existence when spiritual obscurity appears absolute. Roman domination, spiritual deception, and moral deterioration form circumstances mature for heavenly interference. Christ's genealogy through Seth likewise stresses his complete humanity. He distributes the identical physical nature and vital fluid as all individuals descended from Adam through the appointed succession. This authentic human character qualifies him to fulfill as replacement for human transgression. Only an individual who genuinely belongs to the population can embody the population before heavenly righteousness. Still, Christ goes beyond his genealogical possession in vital manners. Where all descendants of Seth transported the contamination of initial transgression, Christ stays without transgression through heavenly formation. Where Seth's descendants shielded reality through human custom, Christ personifies reality as the timeless expression transformed into physical form. Where earlier generations anticipated committed deliverance, Christ supplies that deliverance through his personal offering. The virgin origin safeguards the Sethite descendants while going beyond its restrictions. Mary belongs to Seth's succession through her ancestry. Though the Holy Spirit supplies the heavenly character that typical human generation cannot furnish, Christ receives the commitments provided to Seth's offspring while holding the heavenly capacity required to accomplish them thoroughly. The service of Christ reveals the identical sequences that distinguished Seth's descendants across existence. He divides himself from the wicked spiritual establishment of his period, exactly as Seth's offspring preserve their separation from Cain's brutal culture. He shields and instructs heavenly reality in the presence of resistance, persisting the devoted transmission that started with the appointed male child. Christ's instruction approach frequently utilizes accounts and comparisons that mirror the spoken customs of Seth's descendants. The cautious safeguarding of heavenly reality through unforgettable narratives persists in his service. The students who obtain these instructions transform into the subsequent connection in the sequence of spiritual transmission that extends backward to Seth personally. The execution of Christ corresponds with Abel's killing in opposite. Where Cain terminated his sibling's existence out of envy and animosity, Christ deliberately provides his existence out of affection and compliance. Where Abel's vital fluid appealed for retribution, Christ's vital fluid communicates regarding kindness and pardon. The sequence of blameless anguish transforms from catastrophe into victory. The rising reveals heavenly capacity to conquer the mortality that has troubled Seth's descendants since Adam's corruption. All descendants of the appointed male child have ultimately yielded to death in spite of their devotion. Christ shatters this sequence by ascending from mortality through heavenly capacity. His triumph over the burial place creates the identical opportunity for all who depend in him. The rising of Christ mirrors Enoch's transportation, while exceeding it in extent and importance. Enoch strolled with God and was elevated upward without observing mortality as compensation for personal devotion. Christ rises as the embodiment of all humanity, creating the pathway for alternative individuals to succeed. His elevation renders achievable the spiritual change of complete human population. The committed restoration of Christ will finalize the renewal that started with Seth's appointment. Where the deluge purified the planet of bodily wickedness, the concluding condemnation will remove all moral corruption from existence. Where Noah's household started the environment anew following the torrent, believers will receive a thoroughly restored planet following Christ's restoration. The assembly persists Seth's position as shielder of heavenly reality in a wicked environment. Exactly as the appointed male child's descendants preserved trust through the most obscure intervals of existence, Christian gatherings protect and transmit gospel reality in spite of resistance and harassment. The identical devotion that distinguished Seth's offspring now designates Christ's adherents. The magnificent assignment broadens the missionary impulse that started with Seth's origin. Where the appointed male child's descendants shielded reality for their offspring, believers now transport that reality to all populations and groups. The favor committed through Abraham's descendant discovers worldwide expression through the gospel declared by Christ's students. The optimism that maintained Seth's descendants through deluge, spreading captivity and banishment, now maintains believers anticipating Christ's restoration. The identical heavenly devotion that shielded the spiritual descendant through thousands of years of human existence persists to operate in the existences of those who succeed the supreme offspring of the appointed male child. In Christ, the account that started with Seth achieves its designated summit and finalization. The disregarded male child who delivered the environment, history recalls the victors, the constructors, the monarchs who formed populations with weapon and authority. Their designations resound through tributes and narratives, inscribed in mineral and honored in melody. Still, the most magnificent champion of human existence stays predominantly disregarded. A tranquil male child who never constructed a domain, never succeeded a conflict, never even elevated his voice beyond a murmur. Seth delivered the environment not through power, though through devotion. His appointment arrived in humanity's most obscure period. Mortality had penetrated paradise through trickery. The initial killing had contaminated the planet with blameless, vital fluid. God's image transporters encountered termination before they had scarcely started to increase. In this emergency, heavenly kindness supplied another descendant, a substitute for the virtuous male child, whose existence was shortened by envious anger. Seth received his position without celebration or self-advancement. He never required acknowledgement for transporting such tremendous obligation. The continuation of the human population relied on his devotion. Still, he proceeded with his everyday existence, with tranquil commitment to responsibility. He married, cultivated young ones, labored the earth, and gave reverence to God. Typical pursuits that fulfilled remarkable intentions. The spiritual essence he shielded demonstrated more precious than any physical possession. While his contemporary offspring constructed remarkable urban centers and advanced noteworthy innovations, Seth preserved something significantly more valuable: the recollection of heavenly companionship and the optimism of re-established connection. His inheritance rested not in what he achieved, though in what he transmitted. Each generation of his descendants encountered the identical selection that faced Seth personally. Stay devoted to heavenly summons or drift toward the attractions of physical achievement. Certain individuals, similar to Enoch and Noah, ascended to remarkable elevations of virtue. Alternative individuals preserved a tranquil devotion that shielded the holy custom without spectacular revelation. All offered to the extended sequence of spiritual transmission. The safeguarding of reality through Seth's succession demanded persistent watchfulness against wickedness. The attractions that ultimately overwhelmed the majority of humanity pressed similarly against the appointed descendants. Social influences promoted accommodation. Joining through marriage with wicked households presented immediate benefits. Still, adequate individuals stayed devoted to maintain the heavenly illumination consuming through the most obscure centuries. Seth's approach of environment delivering shows heavenly inclination for spiritual instead of governmental resolutions. God possessed the ability to have prevented human wickedness through overwhelming power or spectacular revelations of capacity. Rather, the heavenly strategy operated through devoted households who shielded reality and transmitted optimism across generations. The deluge revealed both the achievement and the restriction of Seth's assignment. His spiritual offspring supplied the surviving group through which human culture persisted following heavenly condemnation. Still, even that virtuous surviving group transported within themselves the origins of coming wickedness. The difficulty of human character demanded a more thorough resolution than simple safeguarding of a devoted descendants. Seth's position as connection between the former environment and the fresh one discovers its supreme expression in Christ's genealogy. The succession that started with the appointed male child achieves its summit in the supreme appointed male child, Jesus, whose heavenly character supplies what human devotion isolated could never accomplish. Seth shielded the descendants. Christ liberates it thoroughly. The sequence created by Seth persists in all generations of believers. Devoted parents transmit spiritual reality to their young ones. Virtuous gatherings shield heavenly communication against social influences to adjust. Typical individuals existing tranquil existences of compliance offer to intentions they could never thoroughly comprehend. The approach that delivered the environment through Seth persists delivering it presently. Contemporary believers frequently disregard Seth because his account lacks spectacular action. No supernatural indicators designate his service. No remarkable victories confirm his selections. No prompt change validates his devotion. Still, his patient compliance across nearly 1,000 years of existence achieved more than any military operation or governmental movement ever could. The disregarded male child instructs that heavenly intentions operate through continuous devotion instead of remarkable accomplishment. God seldom summons typical individuals to remarkable achievements. More frequently, the heavenly strategy demands simple compliance to obvious orders across extended intervals of duration. The gathering of devoted selections across generations achieves what solitary, spectacular expressions cannot. Seth's inheritance questions contemporary beliefs regarding importance and achievement. Contemporary society honors innovation, accomplishment, and personal progression. Seth's illustration indicates that safeguarding could be more critical than advancement, devotion more precious than recognition, transmission more important than change. His tranquil championship challenges whether present-day champions genuinely merit their position. The appointed male child, likewise, reveals the capacity of heavenly favor to operate through imperfect individuals. Seth was not without transgression, similar to Christ, or transported similar to Enoch. He existed a typical human existence, designated by the identical difficulties and restrictions that influence all born following Adam's corruption. Still, God utilized his ready compliance to achieve deliverance for the complete human population. Contemporary believers receive the identical summons that designated Seth's existence, safeguarding and transmitting heavenly reality in a wicked environment. The particular approaches could vary according to historical situations, though the crucial assignment stays unaltered. Each generation must settle whether to preserve devotion to heavenly communication or accommodate with dominating social influences. Seth's account provides optimism for those who experience overwhelmed by the wickedness surrounding them. The appointed male child existed in an environment where brutality and corruption appeared victorious. Giants controlled the planet. Corruption looked to have succeeded absolute triumph. Still, his tranquil devotion supplied the basis for ultimate liberation. Comparable devotion presently offers to intentions that will transform into obvious in heavenly scheduling. The disregarded male child who delivered the environment reminds us that championship frequently wears typical garments. The most critical conflicts transpire in human hearts instead of on renowned conflict locations. The most magnificent victories involve selecting compliance over ease, devotion over acceptance, reality over temporary benefit. In these tranquil selections, the genuine labor of deliverance persists from generation to generation. Seth stays disregarded by the majority, though recalled by God. His designation materializes in the genealogies that follow heavenly intention through human existence. His spiritual impact extends into all generations of believers. His illustration of devoted transmission supplies the pattern for all who attempt to fulfill heavenly intentions in their personal duration and position. The appointed male child persists to deliver the environment through all who succeed his sequence of tranquil, continuous, devoted compliance to heavenly summons.